Okay, so Herod the Great. Herod's probably a name that kind of lives in infamy. When you think of Herod, you probably think about his role in the Gospels and how he's a murderer of babies. And you may think about all the different Herods that you see about in the Bible. There's a lot of Herods, and we're going to talk about them here in a little bit. But we're talking about the original Herod, Herod the Great. All the other Herods just want to be associated with him. They're his children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren in some cases. And they're going to take his first name as their own. But we're talking about Herod the Great. And Herod's going to be really interesting. He's going to be just a contradiction. He's so almost bipolar about things. On one hand, he's a tyrant who's going to rule with an iron fist and have no qualms about putting down any kind of opposition that he sees. And killing is going to be just kind of second nature. Lots of assassinations. A lot of people just kind of turn up dead around Herod. It's the strangest thing. They drown in pools and drink poison. I don't know how it happens. But Herod's going to be, a lot of people are going to end up dead. Yet despite his power that he amasses, which he does get a lot, he's going to be really insecure. And he's going to be seeking the approval of his people. Even though he's technically not one of them, he wants their approval. And he's not going to get it. And so this is going to be a problem for him. He's somebody that's going to execute his wives and children, and many wives and many children he's going to kill. But he's also going to be tormented by it, and he's going to hate it that he did it. And he's going to, especially his first wife and child, and then even his second wife, he's going to be really tormented by the fact that he abandoned his first wife and child, and the fact that he killed his second wife. He's going to regret it after he does it, and it's going to haunt him. He did, yeah, and so that's going to be strange. He's somebody that takes after a leaf after his own dad, and when the political winds blow, he flips sides. If you remember, Antipater swapped from Hyrcanus II to Aristobulus II when it was convenient, and Herod's going to do the same thing, except he's going to be playing with much higher stakes. He's going to be playing with the people who rule Rome. And so he's going to high risk, high reward, and he's going to reap some good rewards from his political cunning. And he's not a Jew, but he renovates the temple. Although he's not Jewish by birth, he is Jewish by religion, because the Idumeans have been incorporated into the Jewish people. He himself will probably not be that religious. He's probably not that much of a God-fearing man. But he's going to be very careful that his family strictly observes like Jewish dietary laws, and they give the appearance of being good Jews, even though they're really not. And so Herod's going to be a really interesting guy. So let's get into Herod and his life, and let's begin by first not talking about Herod, but talking about the political situation that you have in Rome. So Julius Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC. There's a conspiracy by the Roman senatorial class. If you remember back when we talked about Rome several weeks ago, Caesar is appointed dictator for life, or dictator perpetuo, dictator forever. He has total power over the Roman government. And this is going to be something that the people can't stand, because they can't stand for a king to exist. They're Rome. They're a republic. They're not a monarchy. And so the Roman senators, they're going to band together and have Caesar assassinated. And the people who carry that assassination out are a guy by the name of Brutus and Cassius. And so Brutus and Cassius, if you no Shakespeare, et tu, Brute, they're going to be the ones that stab Caesar to death, actually in front of a statue of one of Caesar's longtime enemies, which is kind of ironic. But Caesar's going to be murdered. When Caesar dies, there's going to be a power vacuum now. People kind of anticipate that his good friend and confidant and military power friend, Mark Antony, will take over for him. And that was kind of seeming like the way things were going to go in his life. But after Caesar dies, his will is read, and it's not Mark Antony who he declares his successor, but some really obscure nephew of his by the name of Octavius. And so Octavius is going to be given the name Caesar. And Octavius's name is, I can't remember it off the top of my head. He's got like seven different names. It's kind of ridiculous. It's Julius Caesar Octavius. Eventually gets the title Augustus. He's got a long name. But because he's now given the name Caesar, all of Caesar's armies are now loyal to Octavius, and Octavius is going to be his heir. So after Caesar is murdered, Brutus and Cassius, they're going to get out of Dodge because you got Mark Antony and Octavius. They're not going to be too happy about that. And there's a lot of people that aren't happy about that. Caesar was really popular. So they're going to flee to the east, and they're going to try and form their own government. It's not going to go so well. As they flee, they start gathering around allies to help them. One of these allies that they gather is none other than Antipater. And they're going to force Antipater to give them some resources and give them some manpower and money. Ultimately, it's not going to end well. And then Octavius and Antony are going to kill Brutus and Cassius, put their little rebellion down. But following on their heels is a guy by the name of Quintus Labienus, who then goes over east even farther than Mark Antony, or farther than Brutus and Cassius. And he convinces the nation of Parthia to come in and invade while Rome's kind of in this state of chaos. They're in a civil war. And so he convinces Parthia to invade, and invade they do. And so Parthia is going to go through and capture much of the Middle East, of East Asia, including Judea. And so this is kind of setting the stage for the beginning of Herod's life in some ways, as Herod is rising to power. Any questions on that? I know that was a lot and maybe kind of confusing. At this point, Rome is still in control over virtually everything, but they're in the middle of a civil war, and their grip is being really questioned. And Parthia gains a lot of territory. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, so let's talk about Herod then. You may remember where we left off last week as we talked about the Hasmoneans. You have two brothers, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. They had kind of lost power when Pompey comes strolling in and recaptures Jerusalem. And the two of them realized that they were in a predicament. Antipater, who was kind of this military advisor that played both sides of them, he's given true authority and true military power. But Hyrcanus is still high priest. He's still ethnarch in name, although he doesn't have much power. And so they realized that if something happens, Rome could just sweep in, annex them, and get rid of their family altogether. So the two brothers put their differences aside, and they marry their children to each other, Alexandra to Antigonus II, and the two of them have a child named Mariamne. Mariamne is going to be really important. We're going to talk about her quite a bit. Meanwhile, Antipater has two sons. The oldest is a man by the name of Faisal, and the other is a man by the name of Herod. And so Herod is going to be born actually in around 73 BC, in the time of Hyrcanus's first high priesthood, when his mother Alexandra was queen of Israel. But for much of Herod's life, he's going to be a child when Antipater's playing both sides, and you have this civil war between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. And Herod's going to learn some lessons, I suppose. He's going to be 15 years old when Herod gains the title of strategos of Galilee. So Antipater, who's really in charge of military things, he's a Roman puppet, essentially. He puts his older son, Faisal, in charge of the more important territory of Judea with Jerusalem and all that. Faisal's going to serve as a strategos for there, but he's going to appoint his younger son, Herod, up in Galilee, which is less important. It's kind of remote, kind of countryside area, and Herod's going to rule there. Herod's going to do a really good job. Let me preface that. Herod's going to do a really good job for the Romans. The Jews are not going to like him so much. He's going to be really, really hard. There's one incident where he summarily decided to put to death this band of bandits, and authority. It was an authority that was questionable, considering the power of the Sanhedrin, and so the Sanhedrin puts Herod on trial, and they condemn him to death. Fortunately for Herod, the Sanhedrin has lost a great deal of their power now. When Rome marched in, the Sanhedrin's power goes down, and he actually gets a royal pardon from his dad. Antipater is going to pardon Herod for his crime. And you can imagine that's not that popular with the people. And so the people up in Galilee, they're going to really have some hard feelings for Herod, because he's kind of a despotic ruler. He rules with an iron fist, and he has no problem putting people to death and resorting to violence. But Rome's going to love that, because Rome wants, above all else, peace, and they're going to want no problems. And they don't really care what you do so long as you don't give them a headache. And Herod's very good from a Roman perspective. He makes sure taxes are due when they're due, and there's no big issues while he's working up there. And so he's going to make some really good friends, including the governor of Syria, and ultimately Mark Antony. And so he and Mark Antony are going to become very friendly. And this is going to be a really big deal for Herod going forward. Herod at this time is married to a woman named Doris, and they have a son who, here we go with naming convention again, who they name Antipater II. And Antipater II is going to be just a pretty young child when Herod's father, Antipater I, comes to Herod and says, "Listen, I have an idea. I think you have a lot of potential, and I think that you would be a really good match for the granddaughter of the Hasmonean, the heir to the Hasmonean dynasty, this woman named Mariamne." And so Herod does what Herod has to do, and he puts his wife and child away, and he banishes Doris and Aristobulus. Even though, by all accounts, he loved them and he didn't want to do it particularly, but he realized that this was in his best political interest, and so he sent them away. And Herod then becomes engaged to Mariamne. Any thoughts about any of that? Does that make sense so far? Okay, so let's enter in the Parthians. The Parthians are the people that we talked about that had the Roman Quintus Labienus comes to them and encourages them to come and expand westward into East Asia, and eastward rather, into East Asia, and they do it. And while they do it, they take over Judea, and they conquer, and they lay siege to Jerusalem, which is just seemingly constantly under siege. And during this time, when Cassius, well, let me back up just a little bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. So when Cassius flees, they pull the support of Antipater. Herod sees that this is a problem because Herod's friends with Antony, and Antony and Cassius are enemies. And so in 43, was it 43? Yeah, 43 BC, Antipater somehow drinks some poison. How could that have happened? Who knows? And Antipater ends up dying. And so he's out of the picture. He was the primary Roman contact in this area. Now the Parthians move in after the death of Antipater, and they conquer much of the land. Herod and his family, much of his family, flee to the fortress at Masada, and they take refuge there. But not before the Parthians can kill his older brother, Faisal, and not before they can help Antigonus then join forces with the Parthians and overthrow Hyrcanus II and overthrow Aristobulus. They mutilate Hyrcanus so that he can no longer serve as high priest. And now that generation's out of the picture. Antigonus then takes up the high priesthood and the kingship. And the brother of Herod is then murdered, which clears him up. And so now you've got a real mess. Herod now flees from Judea. He flees from his home. And he takes his fiancée, Mariamne, and they flee down into Egypt. And in Egypt, they run into Cleopatra, and Cleopatra, who has strong ties with Rome, obviously, and they take a ship from Egypt, and they go to Rome, and they flee in the middle of the winter. What's the problem with taking a boat from Egypt to Rome in winter? The Mediterranean is a wild place. You don't sail on the Mediterranean in the winter. And they end up being just about shipwrecked. And they finally manage to make their way into Rome. And so a lot has happened. Herod is now fatherless, probably by his own hand. His older brother is now, he committed suicide rather than being killed by the Parthians, but he was under Parthian control. Antigonus II is now king, and so Herod's prospects are not looking so great. His one redeeming factor, though, is he has Mariamne with him, the daughter of Antigonus. And so together, he and Mariamne, they go before the Roman Senate. And Mariamne, who's only 14 years old at this time. Again, she's engaged to Herod, who's probably in his, what is that? He was born in the 70s. He's 40, late 30s, 40, married or engaged to a 14-year-old. And Mariamne goes before the Senate in Rome and pleads her case. She states how there's all this disorder. The Parthians are the one who installed Antigonus. And so naturally, Rome doesn't respect Antigonus's rule. But Mariamne says, listen, I'm the granddaughter of the Hasmoneans. Both Aristobulus II and Hyrcanus II, who both served as king at one point, and Pompey came in and intervened with them. They're both my granddad. And so Mariamne has, this great claim to the throne. And so she goes and gives a speech before the Senate in Rome, and something strange happens. Rome doesn't appoint Mariamne as queen as both she and Herod expect. Instead, Antony makes a plea on behalf of Herod and says, listen, I know Herod. He's been a good friend and he's been a good ruler. So let's just go with Herod. Let's let Herod be king. And so they make Herod king rather than Mariamne. And so Herod, instead of Mariamne, becomes king in 37 BC. And so you have Herod is now king, and Antigonus is still there in Israel. So you got kind of this problem that arises. Herod was proclaimed king in 40. He didn't assume power, though, until 37. So 3 years pass, and Herod then, with the backing of the Roman military, goes down from Rome, takes a ship and lands in Galilee, and begins to take back his home. There's a big war that takes place between Antony and Octavius and another friend of theirs that form what's called the Second Triumvirate. Don't worry about that. And they end up defeating the Parthians. Octavian's going to be the one chiefly responsible for that victory. So the Parthians are being defeated in the background as we go here. But Herod takes this force, and they land in Galilee, and they begin to go down south. And they take over Galilee, and then they take over Samaria. And while in Samaria, Herod and Mariamne decide that they're going to actually get married. And so now Herod has some legitimate claim to the throne. Because before, he's just an Idumean, right? He's not a Jew, and yet he's serving as king. The Jewish people wouldn't have it. But now that he's married to Mariamne, now he is married to the rightful heir of the Hasmoneans, and he's going to have a little bit more respect than he would have otherwise. So Herod goes down and he conquers. He's now married, and they come to Jerusalem. The Parthians have kind of set up shop in Jerusalem, and they've kind of expanded the city. And Herod's kind of surprised when he encounters it, because the city's different than when he left it just a couple of years ago. But he lays siege, as you tend to do. And so Herod lays siege once again to Jerusalem. Antigonus II resists, but ultimately you're not stopping Rome. And Rome finally conquers, and Herod instructs the Roman soldiers not to loot the temple, not to loot anybody, because he wants to be popular with these people. He's going to rule them. But the Roman soldiers don't listen. And so Herod conquers. In Rome, they don't loot the temple, but they loot the people. And so this is going to be a problem. Herod's going to be upset about this, and he's going to write this a letter to his good old pal, Mark Antony. And with the authority of Antony, the Roman soldiers are going to be disciplined for their theft, and Antigonus II is going to be killed. And so Antigonus is going to be deposed, he's going to be killed, and he will be no more. Okay, that was a whole lot. Any thoughts or questions about that? Because that was just throwing a ton at you. Yeah. Herod killed his newfound father-in-law. Yeah. Somebody who's got pen and paper, start taking notes on all the people Herod kills. I didn't write them out, but he's killed his father-in-law, he's killed his father, and the list is about to grow exponentially for family members that Herod is going to kill. It's going to be bloody. Any other thoughts? Are you keeping up? I know this gets confusing. The names are only going to get worse when we talk about Herod's children, which we won't do today, but it's going to get bad. Okay, so Herod rules, and while he's ruling, he decides, my first steps, I really need to rebuild Jerusalem. Jerusalem got pillaged while he was in the process of reclaiming it. And so he rebuilds Jerusalem, and he doesn't just rebuild it, he rebuilds it better. He expands the city. He expands the walls. He gives people more room to live. He constructs this huge, beautiful royal palace that's really second only to the temple. And it's this massive structure. He constructs, redoes the Greek Acra, and makes it more of a fortress, which he names after Mark Antony, who's his patron. And so Herod does this big building campaign in Jerusalem, and the people are happy with it. He's broke things, but now he's building back. It's really easy for rulers to break. It's hard for people to build. And so Herod, to his credit, he did some breaking at the beginning, but Herod's going to be known for being the builder. And he's going to build continually and really some good things that last even up till today. Some incredible projects. So Herod has kind of ingratiated himself just a little bit more with the people. The people don't love him, but they don't hate him. Some time passes, and Herod has to now appoint a high priest, because who was high priest? Aristobulus II. Well, he's dead now. He was high priest and king. So one of the good things that kind of ironic, we talked a lot last week about the attempted separation of high priest and king. Well, they're separate now, and they're not getting back together. And so Herod then appoints his brother-in-law, Aristobulus III, to be high priest. There's a problem, and that's the fact that Aristobulus III is 17. How old do you have to be to serve as a priest? 20. So he's too young, but I guess people can overlook it, and they did. And so Aristobulus III becomes high priest despite the fact that he's too young. And there's one of the big religious holidays is passing, and Herod, because of his birth, he's not allowed in the special places of the temple, right? Despite that, you have a court that's for proselytes. They're not allowed in the Holy of Holies as the priesthood, the holy place where the priests are. And he sees his brother-in-law, Aristobulus III, performing his priestly duties. And when he comes out ready to perform his priestly duties, the people are ecstatic. They love him. And he becomes an overnight celebrity because he's, the last male Hasmonean, essentially. And he's doing priestly duties, and the people are very excited. Well, Herod, who can't be up close and personal there, he's out in the back. He sees the attention that Aristobulus is getting, and he begins to feel a little bit jealous. And he begins to feel a little bit insecure. Because what if Aristobulus, who is also the grandson of both Hasmoneans, the brothers, what if he wants my throne? He's a male. He might have a little bit better standing than Mariamne. Definitely better standing than Herod, who's not even a Jew. He's high priest, which has been a pretty powerful position. We just had a long history of high priests that want a little bit more power and take the kingship. And so he's threatened by Aristobulus III. So what happens? Well, Aristobulus III mysteriously drowns in a pool about a year later. He's swimming with some of his friends, and he doesn't come up, and he's mysteriously drowned. And so this then becomes a problem because Mariamne's mother, Alexandra, then begins to suspect that Herod probably had something to do with this. Which Herod totally had something to do with this. And so Alexandra then sends an emissary to Cleopatra down in Egypt, saying, listen, the king up here, the servant of your friend Mark Antony, is a butcher and he's killing my children. He killed my husband. Do something about him. And so Cleopatra then starts talking with Mark Antony, who's down there by this time, her boyfriend and husband. And so Mark Antony takes some land from from Herod, like the area of Jericho or so, and he gives it to Cleopatra, which is going to become an issue here in a little bit. Herod knows about this, and he's upset. So what does Herod do? Well, he kills Alexandra. And at this time, he and Mariamne have two children of their own, two sons named Aristobulus IV. We just had Aristobulus III executed by drowning, and now we're at number 4, and a son by the name of Alexander. They're sent off to be raised in Rome, and they're come back with a strong education and a strong popularity. But Herod has now killed his father, his father-in-law, his mother-in-law, his brother-in-law. Who else can Herod kill? Well, just about everybody. So Herod then becomes suspicious of Mariamne. He's just had to kill his brother-in-law. He's just had to kill his father-in-law. He just had to kill his mother-in-law. And he's suspicious that Mariamne is going to turn against him. And so he sends Mariamne to go live with his uncle, the brother of Antipater, named Joseph. And he instructs Joseph that should Mariamne show any signs of disloyalty, that Joseph should kill her. And Joseph says, I'm not going to kill your wife. And so Herod then has his uncle killed. And so Joseph is out of the picture. But Herod finds some loyal guards and says to them, listen, if Mariamne shows any signs of disloyalty, you kill her. And they say, okay. Ultimately, he's going to begin to doubt his wife's loyalty and begin to believe that she's having an affair, and he's going to have Mariamne killed. Surprise of all surprises. And then Mariamne is no more. And Herod's going to really regret that. Herod, despite his paranoia, he seems to have genuinely loved Mariamne, and he really regrets it after he kills her. And he's going to mourn her basically forever. And he's going to spiral into a really deep depression, one that actually almost kills him. But, don't kill your wife. I don't know what to tell you. So at this time, there's going to be some political realignment that's happening. Herod's going to learn from what his dad did. Antipater was a guy who played both sides, and now Herod's going to do the same. So Herod has been on Team Antony all the way. In Rome, a civil war has broken out yet again, this time between Mark Antony and Octavius. Antony has gone down, fled into Egypt. He's had this mad love affair with Cleopatra, and he's now fighting against Octavius. Anthony, he's going to steal some land from Herod, Jericho in particular, which is a really fertile kind of place. And that's going to upset Herod. He's going to charge Herod a ton of money. And Herod's allegiance to Antony is going to really go down the drain. And Herod's going to be looking for an occasion to swap over to Team Octavius. And so when Antony dies in the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra both die. Rome goes in, sweeps in, takes over the last remnants of the Ptolemaic Empire. Herod's going to be in a real pickle because he's known as the friend of Mark Antony. But Mark Antony is now the traitor who just tried to take power from the new emperor. Octavius, who's going to be known as eventually Augustus, he's going to be the first real emperor of Rome. And he's going to look at Herod and say, "What are you doing? You're a buddy with this guy that I just killed." So Herod runs to Octavius and makes this plea to him to, "Please let me be on your side. Listen, if you let me serve you, I'll be good to you, and I will serve you faithfully and loyally, and you won't have to worry about a thing." And to make that appeal all the more sweeter, he gives Antony an enormous amount of silver. The number could be wrong, but I think, if I remember it right, it was something like 70 talents of silver. That's an obscene amount of money. A talent was typically considered like, I think it was like 30 or 40 kilograms of weight. And so how much is a kilogram in pounds? 2.2. So like 60 pounds of silver times 70. Yeah, I can't do that math. A lot of money. And Octavius says, "Well, if you're willing to give me that much money, Judea is just kind of this backwoods province anyway. I don't care. You can be king." And he allows Herod to be king from that point. And Herod is going to be issuing a pretty good and stable period. And that's, I think, what's really important is that the stability that comes from this. Herod is going to have lots of flaws, but he's going to be king for a long time, right? Over 30 years. We look at what we've just been going through with the Hasmoneans. It's like every other year somebody's killing somebody else for the throne. Herod's going to have a good long rule, which is going to be very good for the people. And Herod's going to start this big building project. He's going to start building lots and lots of things. He's going to build the temple. And he's going to not build the temple. He's going to undertake a renovation of the temple. If you remember, Solomon built his big temple, right? It was a beautiful temple, incredibly rich and full of gold and silver trimmings and everything. When the temple of Solomon is destroyed by Babylon, what's Babylon do? They strip it and they take all the gold, all the silver, all the good stuff, and they destroy and pillage the temple, and it's gone. Well, here comes Zerubbabel with Ezra and Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel rebuilds the temple, and they do the best they can. But what's the reaction of the people when they see it? They cry, right? They weep because it's nothing compared. There's some who, within living memory, remember the Temple of Solomon, and now they see this temple that Zerubbabel built, and it's nothing. It's shabby in comparison. Well, Herod is going to beautify and build the temple. He's going to dramatically increase the size of the Temple Mount. And do you know what I mean by a Temple Mount? That's kind of a strange... Jerusalem's a city set on several hills, right? Like I think it's 7 hills. Mount Zion being the most important. Mount Zion's where the temple will eventually be built. Well, you can't really build a big structure on top of the top of a hill. You got to build something on it, a foundation, if that's what the Temple Mount is. So Herod's going to build the Temple Mount and going to make it way bigger than it used to be. And he's going to beautify the temple. He's going to give it the gold trimmings, and he's going to make it bigger and better. And even the rabbis at the time I think around the time the temple is destroyed, reflecting on it, they say, "He who has not seen Herod's temple has not seen beauty." That's kind of sad considering what's going to happen to it. But that's going to be the temple that Jesus encounters, and the temple that Jesus spends time in is the temple that Herod builds. Herod's going to build Caesarea Maritima, which we talked a little bit about. It's a city named after his newfound patron, Augustus Octavian Caesar, and it's going to be named after him. It's going to be a much, much needed port city for Israel. It's going to bring in all kinds of wealth. He's going to build his own palace, Herodium, where he's eventually going to be buried. And he's going to have a good rule. And it's going to be fairly uneventful aside from all these big projects. There's not going to be any big wars left to fight. It's going to be pretty peaceful. But nevertheless, Herod's going to be paranoid, as paranoid people are going to be. And he's going to have some issues. Herod's going to start thinking that his sons are out to get him. And so in 29 BC, Herod kills Mariamne, which we talked about. Herod's also going to kill his two children with Mariamne, Aristobulus IV and Alexander. And so he's going to take them out of the picture. It seems that they were well liked. They were, Hasmoneans by birth. They had some claim to the throne. And it seems like they might have actually been plotting to take Herod and to overthrow Herod. And so Herod probably had some real suspicions. At the very least, if they weren't plotting it, people were plotting for it to happen on their behalf. Have you heard of the schools of Hillel and Shammai? Okay. During this time, Hillel and Shammai are living. And one of the things, they disagree on all kinds of things, but one of the things they agree on is that Jewish heritage is matrilineal. So you're a Jew if your mother was a Jew, not necessarily your father. I don't know how they get to that point, but that's something that they agree on. That's bad for Herod because Herod's an Idumean. That's good for Herod's two sons, to these two boys, because their mother's a Jew. And so now they're not Idumeans, now they're Jews. And so Herod's threatened by this, and he has them killed. During this time, Herod has kind of refound his first wife, Doris, and his son, Antipater II. And Herod is threatened by Antipater. Surprise of all surprises, has him killed too. So Herod's all alone. During this time, Herod marries a number of women, and I don't mean like he married and divorced. He married a number of women. He had a whole bunch of wives. Herod ends up having, I think, 17 sons, and who knows how many daughters, quite a few. But all of Herod's main heirs are kind of out of the picture here for a little bit. And Herod has to rewrite his will just over and over and over again. People talk about how Herod's having to constantly change his will because he keeps killing his kids. And Herod's new buddy, Augustus, has this really interesting statement. And I'm going to read it in Greek, I'll translate it, but just so you can hear the pun. It's a pun. So Augustus Caesar says about Herod, he says, Kreson Herodu hua enai he huia. And so it's better to be Herod's pig, his hua, rather than his son, his huia. Why is that the case? There's a pun there. Hua, huia. Herod won't touch a pig because he follows kosher, but he'll kill his sons. And so, that's the reputation that he gets. It's better to be Herod's pig than his son. While Herod's so paranoid, you have the massacre of the innocents, right? Which is recorded in Matthew chapter 2. And so you have the Magi who come to Herod. While Herod's busy killing all his kids, the Magi come to Herod and say, hey, we heard that there's a king here. We want to go worship him. He's not you. And so Herod, what's he say? Tell me more. So where is this king? So then Herod has the decree to kill the children in the area where Jesus was, 2 and under. It seems this is recorded only in Matthew. It's not recorded in any historical source. Doesn't mean it's not true. It's probably just so run-of-the-mill of Herod at this point, and there probably weren't that many kids that actually died in this event, that it just isn't mentioned in historical sources. But Herod has the innocents massacred. And in 4 BC, Herod is going to die a really terrible death. He's probably has kidney failure for quite some time. And from what I was reading and what I've heard, kidney failure can exacerbate paranoia, and so that's probably a big part of all this. He's losing his mind. He's old too. He's in his 70s when he dies. That's old, and so he's in bad health. He's in a bad mental place, especially after he kills his Mariamne. He's depressed. He's paranoid. Kills all his sons. Regrets killing all his sons after the fact. And he ends up dying from a mixture of kidney failure and, here's the kicker, genital gangrene. So I can tell you some gross facts later if you want some descriptions. It's horrible. So Herod then dies probably in the year 4 BC. And the rule of his rule is then... Well, before Herod dies, let me say this. Herod says, I'm worried people aren't going to mourn me enough. People aren't going to miss me. So one of Herod's last decrees is to take quite a few prominent members of the Sanhedrin and kill them when Herod dies, so that at least somebody will be crying when Herod dies. Fortunately, his guards say, okay, we won't do that, but okay. And so that doesn't actually happen. But that's where Herod's at. And then Herod dies. Actually, he was in so much pain from his genital gangrene that he took a dull knife that was used for cutting cheese, and he stabbed himself and didn't end up dying from that, and just made it worse. So great end for Herod the Great. And his kingdom is divided amongst his other sons, and we'll talk about them in a coming week. Anything else? Any questions or thoughts? I've got some pictures that I want to show you guys of some of the things that Herod did, and then we'll let the class be yours. Any thoughts? Have you kind of followed along? This is a lot. And we've been covering great spans of time. This has been very focused, and so a lot of detail in this one. So this is a model of Herod's temple. In Jerusalem, they have a miniature model of what Jerusalem would have looked like. And so this is what the temple would have been in Herod's day. And you can see the Temple Mount. You've got all this that built up. So there was originally a hill there, Mount Zion, where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, and which is also Mount Moriah, by the way. And this Temple Mount is built up on top of that, so you can put a big structure on it. And Herod expands it, and it's huge, it's enormous, it's beautiful. You can go up to it today. The Temple Mount's different today than it was. One big thing that sticks out is the Dome of the Rock. When you look at this, the mosque here is not what you actually think. So the mosque is this little place that's got the tin or whatever it is roof, the gray roof. The Dome of the Rock's not actually a mosque. It's a what's the word they use? Yeah, it's like a monument, a shrine. It's supposedly where Muhammad ascended into heaven. And you can see Muhammad's footprint on Mount Moriah, where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, what the Muslims claim. Here's an interesting fact. The Holy of Holies, we don't know exactly where it is. And so where it would have been on the Temple Mount. And so today, many rabbinic Jews won't go up on the Temple Mount, even if they're allowed, which they're typically not, because it's such high stakes. When we went up there were armed guards all over the place. It was wild. But they won't go up there because they fear that they might accidentally step where the Holy of Holies should be. And so many Jews won't even go up on the Temple Mount. Just kind of some interesting facts. Right here, those are the southern steps. That's where Peter had his sermon at Pentecost. And so Peter would have been preaching probably from like right there or so. And down here, those are mitzvah, which are Jewish baptistries. And so people for a long time said, well, you couldn't possibly have had that many baptisms in Acts 2 because there's no water source there. Well, you have all these baptistries because as you go up on the Temple Mount, you'd wash yourself to be clean to go up on the temple. And right around here is where the Antonia fortress would be, which is, Jesus bounces back between that and the palace of Herod in his trial. This is the Wailing Wall right there. That's the last real remaining section of what Herod himself actually built. So Herod had those rocks right there put there. And the Jews, it's a very holy place for the Jews. They go there to worship it, not worship it, but to worship there because it's the last remnant where the temple, was. It's really sad. And when you go there, it's called the Wailing Wall for a reason. They weep for the temple that was lost. And here you got a picture. It's divided men and women. You've got men on the left and women on the right. People put little slips of paper into the stones of the temple just to have their prayer be close to where the temple once was. It's a really sad place. Yeah, it's a retaining wall. It's not, yeah, that's a good point. So this is really interesting. So we took this picture. You can actually go underground. There's all kinds of underground things happening here. Claire took this picture. This is a underground portion of the Wailing Wall. And this is a panoramic, so it's kind of distorted. But the size of the bricks, of the stones that Herod used for this are incomprehensible. You got a guy right over here, and you got a guy right over here. You can't quite see him. It's this enormous, and it's a single stone. Look in the back real quick. You see that where the divider is right there, kind of under the camera above the wall. That rock is probably the width of the auditorium and probably the height of the ground to where that trim is back there. And it came not from Jerusalem. I don't remember where it came from, where it was quarried from, but how do you do that? It's mind-boggling. And those holes that are cut into it were cut into it so that you could help. And they were there for the transportation of the rock. Just incredible stuff that Herod makes. You've got the fortress of Masada. So on the left is what it looks like today. On the right is a replica of what it would have looked like. You can see that there's no scale in that. Try and march your army up there. It's a mountain with the top cut off, basically. And that whole thing would have been a giant fortress. And so there's going to be a lot that happens there. You may notice something interesting, too. Right here in the front, that's not quite the same cliff that you have right there in the replica. We'll talk about that in a little bit, I guess 2 weeks from now. When Rome sieges and destroys the temple during the Jewish revolt, a lot of people hole up in Masada, and Rome says, okay, we're just going to build a ramp. And so they build a ramp. And so you don't mess with Rome, people. When will people ever learn their lesson? So Caesarea Maritima. This is the Mediterranean Sea. It's really pretty, super. We had a really good time when we were there. You have this land right here, and underneath, you can't quite see it like it would have been in the day. Herod created land out in the ocean to stop and break the waves so that you could have a safe harbor for ships. That's artificial land. And the way he did it, well, actually, you can see it pretty good right there. It's just barely above the water line right there. But the way he did it was he took volcanic ash from Italy and mixed it with some kind of cement thing and stuck it on barges, this mixture. And then he sunk the barges. And you would have like a brick that's now under the water. And he built it up. And just this incredible underwater. He created his own harbor. He's making land. And this is a time without cars. like imagine the manpower and the money required to do this. Also in Caesarea, you have an aqueduct. And so one of the things he did here was he made swimming pools in Caesarea Maritima with fresh water that he imported from who knows where. It's not a saltwater pool. It had to be a freshwater pool. And so he made a swimming pool. He had a huge amphitheater that was built. And we spent like a afternoon sitting on that over there in the amphitheater, talking about what we were going to do next. And you can maybe see back right there just a little bit. That's a hippodrome. It's a horse racing place. And so Caesarea Philippi or Caesarea Maritima is really a very Roman city built by Herod. You've got Herodium. This is not a real mountain. That's a fake mountain. And so Herod built a mountain. And one of the things Herod, as he was doing, this was his like personal project. All the others he devoted to people. The temple was for the Jews. Herodium was for him. And so he built this. And legend says he wanted to be able to see Jerusalem from it. It's quite a distance away. It's from Jerusalem. You can't actually, but he did it. And let me tell you, it was a walk getting up there. It was so steep and it was so hot. Do what? Yeah, I don't know how he did it, but yeah, I'm sure there's big rocks. There's caves inside of it. And so there's tunnels that you can use to get out of it. And actually, that's what you see right there. That's the visitor center. I got a shirt there. It says Guns and Moses, which is funny. But there's a little exit right there. There's tunnels inside that you can use. So if it were to be sieged, they would have been covered. You could escape from up there without being seen. It was kind of what it was. This is what it would have looked like at the top of the mountain. This is a model that was up there. This is actually inside the crater right there. This was kind of at the center. But that's what it would have looked like. You have fortress, and you've got the way it was constructed. They had like, obviously you don't have air conditioning, and obviously you don't have heating, but they had the next thing to it. It was they had channels to channel wind in through it for your air conditioning. And under the floors, there was spaces. And so when it gets cold, which it does get cold, they'd light fires under the floors and you'd have a heated floor. It was like just wild stuff. Engineering, incredible. This is a picture of it from the inside, what's left of it. This picture cracks me up. This is our tour guide. Right there on that sign, you may not be able to say, it says danger, cliff edge, no passage. And he just like hopped up there. And cliff edge, like it was like a 400-foot drop. He just hopped up on this fence. And he's like, he was telling us, this is historically what he was telling us here. This is the land that Jesse would have owned, like the land that David would have been a shepherd in, and the fields of Boaz. And so this is what this is overlooking is traditionally what's ascribed to the land that David would have grown up. You may picture David as a shepherd in Ireland. No, there. So not quite the rolling grassy hills that you might think of when you think of shepherds. And then, we'll wrap it up there. So Herod is quite the enigma. He's interesting. He's despotic at times. But generally, he's considered to be a really good ruler. He brought all the bad things we talked about are notable, yes, and they need to be talked about. But he brought much needed stability. The high priesthood separated from the kingship. That's a good thing. You have a king who's king longer than a decade, which is a really good thing. And ultimately, what Herod does is he sets the stage for Jesus. And so obviously Jesus is going to be born. Herod's going to try and kill him. But Herod sets the stage for Jesus to come into the world. And that's going to be pretty interesting.